Okay, you'll now do the binding for the back. So you'll need your back binding piece, or in this case, I cut 2 pieces, and I am sewing them together, and then I'm going to cut it to the correct length. So I'm going to put them together at a 90-degree angle and sew across from corner to corner. And then I will trim off the extra. And if your fabric can be pressed, you can open it. My fabric can't, though. Now, here's where, if you're doing this method, you're most likely using a fabric that cannot stretch on the bias. So this, I just cut this on the grain, and it's not going to stretch as well. Well, it's not going to stretch at all. And so my binding might be a little more wrinkly, not as smooth as there's this other version that has bias binding, but it still works. I've used it successfully with it not cut on the bias. However, there are 2 different ways of binding, one with fabric that frays and one with fabric that does not. So this one that I've showed in a different video is with fabric that frays, and there are absolutely no raw edges left over. But I will be showing you how to do it with vinyl or another fabric that does not fray. And we are going to be sewing it first to the back, then wrapping it around, and then sewing it, and this side will remain, this side will remain raw. So that's the method I'm going to show in this video. If you're doing a different method, then you'll need to check a different video for the instructions for that. But first, I'm going to go and make sure that this piece that I spliced together is the correct length. Okay, I cut it to the correct length, and this is where you will need these pieces that tell you how long to make the back binding. And for this alternate gusset construction, I also need a front binding. So I have that ready to go as well. So I'm going to take my 2 ends and place them right sides together, and we're going to sew them just like we sewed the 2 smaller pieces together. Now double check that you do not have any twists where you don't want them. And trim. Now, there's no real way to get around the fact that you will have to have one of these folds on the flap somewhere. So I would just maybe put it off to the side a bit. So I'm going to do that and fold it in half and mark my bias at each end. It's not bias, my binding at each end. Okay. Next, I'm going to attach the bias for this method that has no raw edges. Sorry, the non-fray fabric that will have a raw edge. There. I'm going to find one of these center marks that I did and match it, one of them with the bottom, right sides together. and one of them with the top. And I'm going to find the center marks kind of hidden between the layers. This is why we mark the center marking on every piece that we can, because we're always searching and trying to find it while making this. So, and you'll notice it's not going to go perfectly around these rounded corners or rounded parts because it has no stretch. But this should still work. And it looks like I need to do a little more stretching. Even though you can't really stretch this fabric, just stretch as much as it'll let you. When we sew it, we will just flatten this out as best as we can. Okay, now I'm going to clip the other side too. Prefer my normal foot when possible, so I'm going to use my normal foot on this, and I will stitch all the way around. Just be careful on the thick spots. And try to flatten out the gusset underneath while you sew to keep it out of your way. Now if your fabric slips a little and you kind of go while you're stitching, that's okay, keep going. You can come back at the end and fix any funny stitching. Not at the end, but after we've sewn this binding, we can come back and fix any weird stitching. Just trying to make this open seam, or this seam here, open and flat as possible. Once I've gotten past those bottom rounded edges, it becomes a lot easier. And then here on the very thick parts, I just go slow if necessary. I do not want to break needles and have them flying at me. And then here I try to flatten these out as much as possible, But you may end up with some wrinkling that you just can't flatten out of the way because you're trying to sew something straight to something curved. And it has very little to no give. Now, I have a different version that I've been working on with vinyl. This vinyl does have some stretch on the bias, so I am doing it the exact same way as this, but my bias binding it has some stretch. So I still am going to have the raw edges, I think. I haven't decided yet. I don't know if my machine can do all the layers of doing it completely enclosed. Phew, okay, made it. Now we're going to wrap this binding all the way around. And this, if we had, see, it's going to kind of stick either in or out. It's not going to be as nice and flat as if we had cut it on the bias. But when we're all done, it'll still look good. We'll have a little bit of wrinkles that we wouldn't have otherwise if it were on the bias. And now I just have to add a bunch of clips all the way around. Here is where hopefully I won't get too frustrated. This is very sticky vinyl, which I keep mentioning. I wanted to use something I had in stock and not buy something new. But sometimes I regret that a bit. Okay. So, deep breath, roll my sleeves up. And I'm going to go ahead and start. I have raised my stitch length quite a bit because this is so thick and because the vinyl is very thick. And I actually am going to change to a better needle for sewing through vinyl. And I'm going to be edge stitching all the way around. Okay, I changed the needle and I'm going to be edge stitching. I really wish at this point that my sewing machine light was working. I'm not sure if that's any better. Oh, now it's in my eyes. Okay, I'll just go right there. And just like before, I'm using my thumb to push the binding and gusset flat as I go. Oh, and let me zoom you in a bit. I have to put my lamp back because my purse is running into it. Careful over your seams. It's just a little bit extra layers. I'm actually really happy with how my machine is doing on these layers with the sticky vinyl. Never quite know how it'll do. You really have to work with your machine, not against it. I actually, though I love vinyl, I really need a machine upgrade to do it justice. But I still am able to get it to work here. Here I am coming up to a thick spot with these different pockets and seams, so I'm just taking it nice and slow. And you shouldn't have to worry about about missing spots on the back, because you'll be cutting off the excess vinyl, and you shouldn't be getting so close to the edge that you're sewing off the edge. Sewing the flap is a treat after sewing the bottom, even around these sharp corners, which aren't too bad on the large, but in the mini they can be really sharp. I'm coming up on another seam on the binding, so I'm just taking it very, very slow. I do not want to get this far and then have a needle break. And remember, we're going to have to do this again on the front while we are wrestling with the back of the bag. But that will be a much shorter length of binding, so that at least is one positive for that. That's why for this method I like to get the back done first, because it's just so much longer than the front binding, and it's nice to get it over with first. More layers, just nice and careful. Okay, very nice. Whew, we made it. Okay, so you can see all the way around I have excess vinyl. So I just need to pick a spot and start cutting, and just like I did earlier, I like to cut with it on my right because I'm right-handed. If I were left-handed, I'd probably cut it the other direction. And then I can just push this way, and basically I'm cutting the width of the scissor blade away from this seam. And you definitely don't want to cut the gusset, but so far I've not encountered that problem with my scissors. Couple of places here where it looks like just a little jagged. I'm trying to avoid it being jagged. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so my back binding is complete. Now I'm just going to do now we're ready to do the front binding.